So I just made a video about an infamous fire that inspired a lot of excellent music. But today I wanted to talk about an infamous fire that destroyed a lot of music. I'm referring to the 2008 Universal Studios fire. You might not have heard of it actually, but it was a small thing at the time that turned into a much bigger deal later, and I'll talk about why in a second. Before I get into that, I want to give you a little bit of background on what Universal Studios is. You probably know the movie production company Universal Pictures. They've made lots of famous movies over the years, and this is their very iconic opening title. But they also are responsible for the Universal Music Group. And Universal is a very accurate name for that because they have tons of artists signed to them. I'm talking Lady Gaga, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, Metallica, Ariana Grande, freaking Mumford & Sons is on this list here. Plus, they own a ton of smaller or defunct labels or catalogs from older musicians, and that collection spans basically the entire 20th century of recorded music. It's incredibly huge. So basically what happened with the fire was it was around 3 a.m. on June 1st, 2008. There were a bunch of maintenance workers working on the asphalt on the outside, and they were heating it with a blowtorch. They waited the recommended hour to make sure that nothing set fire, but the shingles were still incredibly hot and they did end up catching fire. And it wasn't long before the entire place was just completely engulfed in flames. It took a good while to put the fire out too, and just to break things open and get things out. I believe they were working until the next day, so almost 24 hours after the fire had initially been started. And it was definitely concerning. Nobody was killed, but it was a huge fire. The Los Angeles Fire Department sent 516 firefighters, so this was a pretty big deal. And there was some damage to some of the movie props. Actually, some of the props from Back to the Future, the clock tower was damaged. And when the fire was out and the smoke began to clear, people were definitely concerned, like, oh my God, what was damaged in this fire? But the very next day, on June 2nd, Universal Music Group gave a statement to Billboard saying that thankfully none of the masters or any of the important things were burned in the fire. We had no loss, thankfully, a Universal spokesperson tells Billboard. We moved most of what was formerly stored there earlier this year to our other facilities. Of the small amount that was there and awaiting to be moved, it had already been digitized, so the music will still be around for many years. The spokesperson continues, moreover, in addition to being digitized, we also had physical backup copies of what was still left at that location, so we were covered. Unfortunately, it turns out that that wasn't completely true. You mean a corporation would just come on the internet and lie? Yeah, I do, Buster. Welcome to the 21st century. My God. It actually wasn't until years after the fire that we started to get the real picture of what had happened. The New York Times did some incredible investigative journalism and published their article, The Day the Music Burned, almost 11 years to the day that the fire started. In this article, the author, Jody Rosen, alleges that UMG was much less than truthful about what was actually burned. Rosen obtained a lot of internal materials from UMG and discovered that the number of 0 that they had given to Billboard was far from correct. According to some of the internal files with UMG, the number of assets destroyed was 118,000. But the senior director for vault operations there, Randy Aronson, actually said that number might be as high as 175,000. 175,000. That's so much music. And then allegedly, there was another report in 2009 that said that number could be as high as 500,000. That's so much music. So you might be hearing this and wondering, well, I can still listen to Drake and Ariana. Even for some of the older music, like I can still listen to Aretha Franklin. Like I don't understand why this loss is a big deal. And for that, I would like to give you a small art pop quiz. Now, if you were an art historian, so somebody interested in preserving culturally important works or, what have you, would you rather have the original Mona Lisa painting painted by Leonardo da Vinci or this picture that I took of the Mona Lisa back in 2017? As hot as I am, I appreciate you picking the first one. The master recording of a song is kind of like having the original painting. It conveys so much more detail, the textures of the paints, the true colors. It's the original thing. And that was what we lost when we lost the master recordings. What survived that fire is just copies of the true original. So if anyone wanted to go back in and remaster these famous albums by famous artists, they wouldn't be able to anymore because those masters are gone forever in the fire. And not only that, but it's actually almost certain that unreleased music was lost as well. For example, just this past year in 2020, Decca, which is a famous jazz label and also owned by the UMG Group, discovered an entire unreleased Ella Fitzgerald live album. It literally had never been published before. It was sitting in the vault and they discovered it just this past year, almost 60 years after it had been recorded. It's wonderful that they did discover that, but it just speaks to the fact that there was probably more where that came from that was then burned up. And there's really no telling what specifically went. The New York Times article that I was talking about earlier lists all of these musicians as potential victims of the fire. Feel free to pause and read that. It also alleges that a lot of Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly masters were completely lost, which is unbelievably tragic and pieces of music history that we just can't ever get back. I don't want to be dramatic, but I just feel like this is kind of the modern musical equivalent of the burning of the Library of Alexandria. We just don't know what was lost. It was such a catastrophic loss of information and historical archives. This is the sort of thing that keeps me up at night, what was there? What could we have had? How could this have been stopped? It boggles the mind. So if you're interested in this, I'm going to link a couple articles below, especially the New York Times one, because like I said, it's excellent reporting, even though it's incredibly tragic. There's also some ongoing lawsuits right now because of this 2019 article. A bunch of the musicians in the UMG Group sued, including the estate of Tupac. And it was just in this past year, in February 2020, that UMG started confirming more tapes that had indeed been destroyed. So it's quite possible that more information will come out of this in the next few years. So now that you know, keep an eye out for it. Anyways, that's all I have to say on that, but let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.